All right, folks, major paper number 2 has been assigned as of yesterday. We are now going to be focusing on that one. I had mentioned synthesis and detailed a little bit in my last video. I'm going to go into a bit more detail. I've posted a PowerPoint instead of a diagram because I think the PowerPoint gives a little bit more specific information regarding how to synthesize two sources than the diagram would. And so we're going to go through the PowerPoint really quickly. You're welcome to look through it on your own. But the process of synthesis, like I have mentioned before, it's not a compare and contrast approach to writing. It doesn't identify a superior or inferior source, and synthesis has no expected result. What you're going to be doing with the two sources that you're going to be looking at is reflecting on how both of them can be interpreted in a way that leads to an original understanding. What synthesis is a process of discovery, basically. It requires compromise and it requires reflection, because what you do is you observe at least two sources or multiple sources. For the purpose of this paper, it's just going to be two. But you analyze those two sources and you consider what those sources say to you. So if every person in this class looked at two sources, every person wrote a synthesis of those two sources, no two papers should be alike, because the interpretations of those two sources are going to result in individual reactions that are unique. Basically, source number 1 is going to say something to you personally, and source number 2 is going to say something to you personally. When you reflect on those two sources, the result you have is a third personal reaction. So the variability between individuals means that all of these factors are going to result in a completely different and completely unpredictable synthesis. Synthesis works by engaging in parallel analysis of sources. You'll draw on both sources for support for your claims, potentially in the same paragraph or section, but like I said yesterday, for organization's sake, it's usually easier to isolate each source individually, discuss it completely, analyze it completely, and then move on to the next source. Thesis statements are easier to write after the paper is completed, because the thesis is going to incorporate some idea of your conclusion in terms of how you synthesize those two sources. We're going to skip a little bit of the Hegelian synthesis, because I went into that yesterday and it's not particularly relevant to the process of writing this paper, which is the main focus of this video. But step number 1 in synthesis is to establish a thesis. The thesis in synthesis is comparable to a paper's thesis statement. The philosopher makes a claim. That claim relates to source number 1. Establish an antithesis. Antithesis, which means opposite, seeks to counter the claim made by the thesis. This is the claim made about source number 2. Step number 3 is to reconcile the common truths that exist between the thesis and antithesis. Reflection on both of those claims will lead to the philosopher discovering the common truths. What is going on between these two sources that they have in common? Similar to canceling out portions of a math equation, the philosopher will isolate what is true between the two claims and not really focus on what is not shared between the two claims. The isolated truths get reorganized into a new claim that reconciles both sides. That claim is called synthesis. Now, where our papers differ from Hegelian synthesis is that Hegelian synthesis doesn't end. On deriving a synthesis from those two truths, a Hegelian philosopher considers that synthesis a new initial thesis and will establish an antithesis for that and go all the way through to synthesis again. The idea of this process is to find a synthesis that has no antithesis, and that's considered a universal truth. And then the process starts over. Philosophers are weird people. An example of synthesis as it might be applied to academics analyzing real sources is included in the slideshow. A thesis statement for source number 1. The comic book movie Blade was Marvel's first step toward creating a mature, realistic comic book film, rendering heroes as powerful but ultimately human and relatable individuals. Okay, so that's claim about source number 1. Source number 2 is going to be any of the Avengers movies. The godlike characters established in the expanded Marvel Cinematic Universe seen in the Avengers films are relatable because of humanizing character traits, motivations, and flaws. So we're already seeing something in common between these two. Heroes are powerful, but mostly human. However, Blade was a very human character with some powers that set him apart from humans. In the Avengers, we have characters who are at an exceptionally high level that sets them well apart from humans. The Hulk, Thor, characters like that. Neither of these is a wrong statement. There are godlike characters in the Avengers, but who have human traits. In Blade, we have a human character who also has superpowers. But when we synthesize those two, we're going to find that Marvel's films, from Blade all the way to the Avengers, establish that no matter the power or ability of a character, effective writing requires a dose of reality, an injection of flaws, and providing human motivations, or audiences will have difficulty relating to what they are seeing in regard to character development. Nobody is going to look at a perfect guy like Superman, who is just completely flawless in terms of his morality and inability to fail at whatever task he's trying to attempt, versus looking at a character like Ant-Man, who was a petty criminal. He doesn't really understand the technology that makes him grow or shrink. He just uses it to do his job, and sometimes he screws up, which may make us laugh or may make us sympathize with him, but we can relate because we have screwed up in trying to accomplish something ourselves. So synthesis accommodates and reconciles two different points of view into a new single perspective that compromises and finds grounds for agreement. Just like with our source number 1 being Jesse's girl. When we look at that, what we're trying to figure out is how is the singer, Rick Springfield, trying to make a claim that he belongs with this girl? What lengths does he go to in order to attract her? And if you watch the music video, you can characterize him from that perspective as well. Your source number 2, which you can select as an individual, is going to establish the same thing. Source number 1 is trying to get the girl based on this, and this approach that he takes. Source number 2's main character, singer, or narrator is trying to get the girl by doing something different from source number 1. And then when we get to the synthesis section, we're trying to figure out what would normal people do. Typically in a romance, we usually have somebody who attracts the attention or affection of somebody by going to extraordinary lengths or by having extraordinary characteristics. I have not read Twilight, and I have not read 50 Shades of Grey, but I have read enough papers about them to get a pretty good understanding that Edward attracted Belle's attention by being supernaturally attractive, by having extraordinary characteristics, which came from being a vampire, which she didn't know until later on, just the same as Christian Grey attracted the girl by being a very handsome man who had wealth and power at his disposal, and later on she discovered other reasons why she was attracted to this individual as well. So source number one is not going to be a comparison. He's going to take his approach to attracting his woman, and we're going to identify that based on our reaction to it. Source number two's character is going to attract that significant other in a different way, maybe based on physical or other characteristics, maybe by performing similar actions to the singer in our source number one. But when we synthesize those, what we're looking for is whether or not this is normal and how completely close or completely far apart they are. So take a look at that rubric, and please look over the synthesis presentation and then start getting in touch with me. See if we can discuss how to make it easier to understand how to get this paper written. Synthesis can be intimidating, but it's not really challenging, and I don't think anybody in this class should have any problem with it. As a last note, I'm going to start reading and start getting grades on the critical analysis papers. I'll be grading them as quickly as I can. Hopefully I will have grades posted for all of them no later than Friday. But if something extraordinary happens where I can't get all of those graded by then, I will send out an email and let everybody know. But please continue to concentrate on this paper. Thanks, and have a good one.